The city of New York was alive below, a constant stream of yellow taxis and blinking lights. But up here on the 40th floor, everything was completely silent. It was that strange kind of silence that only happens in expensive hotel rooms at 3 in the morning, the kind that feels heavy, like it is pressing down on your chest. Keanu sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the massive window at the skyline he had seen 1,000 times before. To anyone else, the view would have been breathtaking, a symbol that they had made it. But to him, it just looked like lights on a cold, distant planet. He rubbed his hands over his face, feeling the rough stubble on his chin. He was exhausted, a deep tiredness that sleep couldn't seem to fix. It wasn't just the physical weariness from months of filming and doing press rounds. It was something heavier, a weight that had settled in his bones years ago and refused to leave. The room was filled with everything a person could want, a minibar stocked with expensive drinks, a soft mattress, scripts worth millions of dollars lying on the desk. Yet the room felt empty. Keanu stood up and walked barefoot across the plush carpet. He stopped in front of a mirror that hung on the wall. The man looking back at him looked familiar, yet distant. The world saw him as an action star, a guy who dodged bullets and saved the day on the big screen. They saw memes about him being sad or wholesome, but they didn't see the human being standing in this room right now. They didn't see the man who had attended too many funerals, who had held the hands of people he loved as they slipped away. The memories were like ghosts in the room, invisible but loud. The loss of his daughter, the passing of his partner, the friends who were gone too soon. It all swirled together in his mind, a mix of grief and confusion that he couldn't quite shake off. He let out a long sigh and walked away from the mirror. He couldn't stand there anymore. He felt a sudden urge to get lower, closer to the ground. So he didn't sit back on the fancy chair or the bed. Instead, he sank down onto the floor. He folded his legs, resting his back against the cold wall. The floor was hard, which felt somehow more honest than the soft bed. Sitting there in the dim light, the silence of the room roared in his ears. He thought about the people he had met throughout his life. He thought about the fans who waited in the cold just to see him for a second, their eyes filled with excitement. He thought about the powerful people he worked with, the ones who always seemed to want more. Everyone was running. Everyone was chasing something. And for what? Most people he met seemed stressed or angry or lonely, even when they had everything they needed. It felt like the whole world was stuck in a trap, but nobody knew where the door was. A sudden feeling of frustration hit him. It wasn't anger at anyone specific, but a deep frustration with the nature of life. Why was it so hard? Why did humans make it so difficult for themselves? We hurt each other, we judge each other, we destroy the planet and ourselves. He looked up at the ceiling, his eyes searching the shadows as if he could see through the concrete and steal all the way to the stars. "Is this it?" he whispered. His voice sounded small in the large room. "Is this all there is?" He wasn't sure who he was talking to. He wasn't a religious man in the traditional sense, didn't follow strict rituals, but he believed in something bigger. He believed in the energy between people, in goodness, in a force that held the universe together. And right now, alone on the floor, that force felt like the only thing that could give him an answer. "I don't understand," he continued, speaking a little louder now, letting the words hang in the air. "We have so much. We have brains, we have hearts, we have this beautiful planet. But we are miserable. We are our own worst enemies." He paused, his heart beating a little faster. It felt strange to be speaking out loud to an empty room, but the loneliness was pushing him to do it. He needed to ask the question that had been bothering him for years. "If you are up there," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "if you are listening, tell me, what is wrong with us? What is the worst thing we do? Why can't we just be happy?" He closed his eyes tight, waiting. He expected nothing. He expected the sound of a siren from the street below or the hum of the air conditioner. He expected to just sit there for a few minutes, feel silly, and then get back into bed to stare at the ceiling until sunrise, but something happened. The air in the room changed. It wasn't a gust of wind or a drop in temperature, but a shift in the atmosphere. The heavy silence suddenly became thick with presence. It felt as though the walls had expanded, as if the room was suddenly much larger than it was a moment ago. The hair on his arms stood up, not from cold, but from a sudden electric feeling that washed over him. Keanu kept his eyes closed, afraid to move. The feeling of isolation that had been crushing him just seconds ago began to lift, replaced by a sensation that he was not alone. It wasn't a scary feeling. It was actually the opposite. It felt like being a child again, when a parent would come into the room to check on you during a storm. A feeling of immense safety and power. He took a shaky breath. He knew, with a certainty that he couldn't explain, that his question had been heard. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu felt ready to hear an answer that wasn't his own. Keanu kept his eyes closed, afraid that if he opened them, the feeling would vanish. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed too loud for the quiet room. He expected the silence to return. He expected to realize he had been imagining things, that it was just the stress and the lack of sleep finally catching up with him. But the feeling didn't go away. Instead, it grew stronger, wrapping around him like a warm, heavy blanket. It was a strange sensation. His body was sitting on the floor of a hotel in Manhattan, but his mind felt like it was floating in a deep, endless ocean. He didn't hear a sound with his ears. There were no booming words from the sky, no sudden flashes of light. It was much quieter than that. The words formed directly inside his mind, clear and sharp, cutting through the noise of his anxiety like a knife through fog. It wasn't a voice that sounded old or young. It was just pure understanding. It felt like a memory, yet it was happening right now. "I am here," the presence seemed to say. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Keanu swallowed hard, his throat dry. He didn't know how to talk to something that felt so big. He felt small, like a speck of dust, but he also felt incredibly safe. For years he had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, trying to be strong for everyone else, trying to keep his grief hidden behind a polite smile. But here, in the dark, he knew he didn't have to pretend. "I asked you a question," Keanu thought, focusing his mind on the presence. He wasn't sure if he should speak out loud or just think it, so he did both, whispering the words into the empty air. "Why are we like this? Why is there so much pain? What is the worst thing about us?" The presence didn't rush to answer. There was a pause, a moment of patience that felt like it lasted for an eternity, but also just a split second. It was as if the universe was taking a deep breath before speaking. Keanu could feel a sense of compassion washing over him, unlike anything he had ever felt from another human being. It wasn't judgment. There was no anger in the response, only a deep, sad love. "I hear your pain," the presence resonated within him. "I see the heavy heart you carry. I know what you have lost. I know the funerals you have attended. I know the tears you have cried in private." Keanu felt a tear escape from under his closed eyelid and roll down his cheek. He hadn't told anyone about the depth of his sorrow for a long time. He had learned to bottle it up, to use it in his acting, to hide it behind the characters he played. But this presence knew. It knew everything. "It is because of that pain that you ask," the voice continued. "You look at the world and you see the suffering. You see the violence, the greed, the hatred. You want to know where it comes from?" Keanu nodded slightly. Yes, that was exactly it. He opened his eyes, but he didn't look at the room. He was looking inward now. He started to list the things that bothered him, the things that kept him up at night. He thought about the news stories he read, the history books, the way people treated each other. "It's the greed," Keanu whispered, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "People kill for money. They destroy the planet for profit. That must be the worst habit. Or maybe it's anger. The wars, the fighting. People hate each other for the color of their skin or for what they believe. That has to be it, right? We are cruel." He felt certain he was right. These were the big things. These were the sins that ruined the world. If he could fix greed and violence, everything would be okay. That was the logical answer. That was what every movie he ever made taught: fight the bad guy with the gun. Stop the villain from stealing the money, but the presence inside him shifted. It felt like a gentle correction, like a teacher guiding a student who is looking at the wrong page of the book. You are looking at the symptoms, the voice said softly. You are looking at the fruit, but you are ignoring the root. You are looking at the fire, but you are not looking at the spark that started it. Keanu frowned, confused. What do you mean? Greed isn't the root? Violence isn't the problem? Violence is what happens when people run out of love, the presence explained. Greed is what happens when people feel empty. You are asking about the habits of humanity, but you are looking at the explosions. You are looking for the monsters in the dark, thinking that if you can fight the monster, the village will be safe. The voice paused, and the feeling in the room became incredibly intense. It felt like the gravity in the room had increased. Keanu leaned his head back against the wall, listening with every fiber of his being. But the real demons do not hide in the dark, the presence continued, and the words sent a chill down Keanu's spine. The real dangers walk in the daylight. They sit at the dinner table. They are in the things you do every single day without thinking. The worst habits are not the dramatic sins that make the news. The worst habits are the quiet ones. They are the silent killers of the soul. Keanu sat there, stunned. He realized that, in his entire life, he had never thought about it that way. He always thought being a good person meant not doing the big, bad things. He didn't kill anyone. He didn't steal. He tried to be kind. So why did he still feel so lost? Why did so many people he knew who were good people feel miserable and lonely? If you want to understand why the world is broken, the presence said, you have to stop looking at the world and start looking at the mirror. You have to look at the small things, the things you ignore, the things you think are harmless. Keanu took a deep breath. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. He had spent decades learning how to fight enemies on screen, how to win battles, how to survive impossible odds. But this felt different. This wasn't a battle against the villain. This was a battle against his own nature. Show me, Keanu thought, his desperation clear. Tell me what these habits are. I want to know. I need to know. The presence didn't answer immediately. Instead, Keanu felt a wave of images and sensations flooding his mind. It wasn't a lecture. It was a showing. He felt his own mind being opened up, his memories being replayed in front of him. He saw moments from his past, moments where he had made choices. Small choices. Choices he had forgotten about years ago. Close your eyes again, the voice urged, though Keanu felt like he had never truly opened them. Look at the day you just lived. Look at the people you walked past. Look at the thoughts you had while you were alone. The answers are there. They have always been there. Keanu felt a sense of anticipation mixed with fear. He was about to hear something that would change his perspective forever. He realized that the worst habits weren't about what humans did to each other on a battlefield. They were about what humans failed to do in the quiet moments of their lives. And as he sat there on the cold floor of the hotel room, he knew he was about to face the truth about himself and the truth about everyone else. The presence was ready to speak, and the silence was about to break. The presence in the room didn't rush. It felt like time had slowed down, stretching out so that every second had enough room to hold a lifetime of thought. Keanu waited with his hands resting on his knees, his breathing slow and steady. He was ready for the heavy stuff. He was ready to hear about violence, about wars fought over lines on a map, or the destruction of the environment. He was prepared to be scolded for the way humanity tears itself apart. He steeled himself, thinking that the worst habits must be monstrous. Ugly things that only monsters do, but the voice that spoke into his mind was gentle, almost sad. The first habit, the presence began, is the habit of waiting. Keanu opened his eyes slightly, confused. Waiting? That didn't sound like a sin. That sounded like patience. Not patience, the voice corrected, sensing his thought immediately. I mean the habit of not living right now. You humans are always looking at the clock or the calendar, but you are never looking at the moment you are in. You tell yourselves, I will be happy when. Keanu froze. The words hit him like a physical blow. He remembered sitting in his trailer on movie sets, staring at the wall, thinking, asterisk, I just need to get through this week, and then I can rest. He remembered being a teenager, thinking, if I just get this role, then I'll be made. He remembered thinking, if I just find someone to love, then the loneliness will stop. Asterisk, you say. I will be happy when I am rich, or I will be happy when I am famous. Or I will be happy when I retire, the voice continued. But the when never comes. Because when you reach that point, you just pick a new when. You spend your entire lives preparing for a future that hasn't happened. While the life you are actually living, the one that is happening right here, right now, passes you by unnoticed. You are waiting to start living, but you are already alive. You are just missing it. Keanu looked around the hotel room. He realized he had been doing exactly that for weeks. He had been waiting for the press tour to end, wishing the days away instead of finding the joy in the work he was doing. He felt a sudden sharp regret for all the moments he had wished away just because they were difficult. The second habit, the presence went on, shifting the feeling in the room from sadness to something sharper, is comparison. Suddenly, Keanu didn't just hear the voice. He saw images flashing in his mind. He saw people scrolling through glowing screens late at night, their faces illuminated by a cold blue light. He saw teenagers looking in mirrors and hating what they saw because they didn't look like the filtered pictures they saw online. He saw successful businessmen looking at other successful businessmen and feeling like failures because they didn't have a bigger boat or a faster car. You are constantly measuring your insides against other people's outsides, the voice said. You look at the masks people wear, their perfect smiles, their vacation photos, their highlight reels, and you compare them to your own hidden struggles, your own pain, your own messy reality. It is a comparison that cannot ever be won. Keanu thought about his own industry. He thought about the red carpets, the magazine covers, the constant pressure to be the best, to be the most liked, to be the biggest star. He remembered the feeling of reading a review that compared him to someone else, or seeing another actor get a part he wanted. It was a poison. It made you feel like you were never enough, just as you were. You look at your neighbor, the presence explained, and instead of seeing their heart, you see what they have, and you feel a lack. But you are comparing your chapter 1 to their chapter 20. You are comparing your pain to their public smile. This habit steals your gratitude. It makes you forget that you are unique. It turns brothers into strangers and makes you your own worst enemy. Keanu let out a long breath. He realized how much energy he wasted worrying about how he stacked up against others. It was exhausting. It was a race with no finish line. And the third habit, the voice said, and the tone deepened, becoming even more serious, is the avoidance of pain. Keanu tensed up. This one he knew well. He had spent a lifetime trying not to hurt. He had lost so many people he loved, and the grief had been unbearable at times. He had thrown himself into work, into dangerous motorcycle rides, into anything that would make him feel something else, anything else, just to stop the hurting. You run from sorrow, the voice said. Not with judgment, but with understanding. You treat pain like a mistake. You treat grief like an enemy to be defeated. You numb yourselves with distractions, with chemicals, with noise, with busyness. You will do anything to avoid feeling the ache in your chest. But, the voice continued, by avoiding the pain, you kill the depth of your love. Pain is not the opposite of love. Pain is the price of love. You grieve because you loved. The deeper the love, the deeper the pain. When you numb the pain to protect yourself, you also numb your capacity to love. You become half alive. You walk through the world protected, but you are also isolated. You are safe, but you are alone. Keanu felt a tear slide down his cheek, hot and fast. He realized that in his efforts to be strong and not let his grief break him, he had built walls around his heart. He had stopped letting people in as deeply as he used to, terrified of losing them again. He was avoiding the pain, yes, but the voice was right. He was also missing out on the fullness of life. He was missing the connection, these 3 habits waiting for the future. Comparing himself to others and avoiding the pain of the past were not crimes. You wouldn't go to jail for them. But as the present spoke, Keanu realized they were far more dangerous. They were quiet killers. They didn't kill the body. They killed the spirit. They turned a life that could have been a vibrant, colorful masterpiece into a gray, repetitive routine. He sat in the silence for a long time, letting these 3 truths sink into his bones. He felt stripped bare. He saw how he had lived his entire life trapped in these 3 loops. Always rushing, always judging himself, always running from his own heart. It was a shock to realize that the worst habits weren't things that evil villains did. They were things that normal, good people did every single day. Is there more? Keanu finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. He felt like he had learned enough to change his life forever, but he sensed the presence wasn't finished. There was a weight still hanging in the air, something bigger that tied all these habits together. There is one more, the presence replied. The root of them all. The habit that makes all the others possible. And it is the one that shocks people the most. Keanu leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes closed tight. He was afraid to ask, but he knew he had to hear it. He took a deep breath and prepared himself for the final, shocking truth. The silence that followed the mention of the first 3 habits was heavy, but not in a bad way. It felt like the air had cleared after a storm. Keanu sat with his back against the wall, his mind racing. He thought about the waiting, the comparing, and the avoiding of pain. He could see them so clearly now. He saw how they had woven a net around him, trapping him in a life that looked successful on the outside but felt quiet and desperate on the inside. But even as he accepted these truths, he felt like there was a missing piece. If these were the symptoms, what was the cause? Why did humans wait? Why did they compare? Why were they so afraid of sadness? There had to be a root, a single great mistake that humanity kept making over and over again. He took a deep breath and asked the question that was burning in his mind. Is there anything else? He whispered into the dimly lit room. Is there a habit that is worse than these? Is there something that creates all this suffering? The presence in the room seemed to hesitate, or perhaps it was just gathering the weight of the answer. The air grew thick, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. When the voice finally spoke, it wasn't loud, but it hit Keanu with the force of a physical impact. The worst habit of all, the voice said, the one that poisons everything else, is that you have forgotten that you are going to die. Keanu's eyes snapped open. He stared blankly at the opposite wall, his breath catching in his throat. That wasn't what he expected. He expected to hear about selfishness or maybe the lack of faith. But this? Everyone knew they were going to die. It was the one fact of life. How could they forget it? You think you remember, the voice continued, reading his confusion. But you do not live like it is true. You live as if you have an unlimited supply of time. You act as if there is always a tomorrow waiting for you to fix your mistakes, to say, I love you, to be happy. You treat your time like it is an infinite resource, like water that will never run out. The presence shifted, and suddenly Keanu felt a sharp sense of urgency. It was the feeling of a deadline approaching. The way he felt on the last day of a shoot when the sun was going down and they had to get the final shot. But this feeling was for his entire life. Because you believe you have time, the voice explained, you tolerate things that make you miserable. You stay in jobs you hate because you think, I will quit later. You stay in relationships that hurt you because you think, it will get better next year. You hold grudges against people you love, thinking you can make up with them whenever you want. Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He thought about the fights he had with people he cared about, arguments over small, stupid things. He thought about the times he had walked away angry, thinking he could always call them tomorrow. But for some of them, tomorrow never came. He knew this better than most. He had lost people suddenly, without warning. And yet, even knowing that, he still fell into the trap of thinking he was invincible. Do you see? The voice asked gently. If you knew for a fact that you would drop dead in 1 hour, Would you be angry at your friend for a rude comment? Would you care if your car was dirty? Would you worry about what your neighbor thinks of you? No, you would only care about love. You would run to the people you care about. You would breathe in the air and be thankful for it. The realization was stunning. Keanu realized that the fear of death wasn't the enemy. The real tragedy was living a life of automatic pilot, just going through the motions, checking boxes, waiting for a future that might not arrive. You work in jobs you despise to buy things you don't need, the voice went on, its tone compassionate but firm. You fill your life with noise and distractions to avoid facing the silence. Why? Because the silence reminds you that your time is short. And that truth terrifies you. So you build a life of busyness to hide from the fact that you are mortal. Keanu looked down at his hands. He saw the wrinkles, the scars, the signs of aging. For years, society told him to fight this. To dye the hair, to use creams, to stay young forever. But the voice was telling him the opposite. It was telling him that accepting the end was the only way to truly live. Death is not the enemy of life, the presence said. Death is the teacher. It is the frame that gives the picture its value. A song is beautiful because it ends. A sunset is precious because the sun goes down. If the song never ended, it would just be noise. If the sun never set, it would just be a burning star. Your life is beautiful precisely because it is temporary. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally broke free. They streamed down his face, hot and uncontrollable. It was a shocking truth because it turned the world upside down. He had spent his life running away from the end, trying to preserve things, trying to hold on tight. But the secret was to let go. To realize that every moment was a miracle simply because it was happening. The worst habit, the voice repeated, softer now, is forgetting that you are a guest here. You are just passing through. This planet, this body, this life, it is a gift, not a possession. And because you treat it like a possession, you hoard it. You protect it. You close yourself off. But if you remembered you were a guest, you would enjoy every second of your stay. Keanu felt a massive weight lift off his shoulders. It was the weight of pretending that he would live forever. It was the pressure of thinking he had to accomplish everything, be everything, have everything. All of that crumbled in the face of this simple, terrifying, beautiful truth. He wasn't going to be here forever. No one was. And that was exactly why this moment sitting on a hotel floor, crying, talking to the divine was so incredibly important. So, do not fear the end, the voice whispered, beginning to fade slightly, like a dream slipping away upon waking. Fear the unlived life. Fear the wasted moment. Fear the anger that kept you from saying you were sorry. That is the true tragedy. Keanu sat there for a long time, the silence returning to the room. But it wasn't the heavy silence from before. It was a peaceful silence. He was alone again, but he didn't feel lonely. The presence was gone, but the feeling remained. He looked at the rising sun starting to peek through the curtains. It wasn't just another day. It was a gift. A limited time offer. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to waste a single second of it. He wiped his face and stood up, his legs steady. He knew what he had to do now. The light coming through the curtains had changed. It was no longer the harsh, artificial glow of the city street lamps, but the soft, golden warmth of the morning sun. Keanu stood by the window, watching the city wake up below. The streets were filling up with yellow taxis and people rushing to work. Just a few hours ago, that scene would have made him feel tired and isolated. He would have looked down and seen a chaotic, lonely machine. But now, as he watched from the 40th floor, he saw something different. He saw life. He saw millions of hearts beating, millions of stories happening all at once. Right now, he turned away from the window and walked to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it waking up his skin. He looked in the mirror again. The face looking back was the same one he saw yesterday, but his eyes were different. They were clearer. For years he had looked in mirrors and searched for flaws, or he had tried to fix his hair to look like the movie star everyone expected. Today, he didn't try to fix anything. He just looked. He saw the lines around his eyes, signs of laughter and sorrow, and he didn't feel the urge to hide them. He saw a man who was getting older, and instead of fear, he felt a strange sort of gratitude. It meant he was still here. He got dressed slowly. Usually his mornings were a blur of rushing, throwing on clothes, drinking coffee in one gulp, checking his phone, running to the next appointment. He lived in the future, always 10 steps ahead of where he actually was. But this morning he moved deliberately. He felt the texture of his shirt against his skin. He tied his shoelaces and actually noticed the way his fingers moved. He took a sip of coffee and didn't gulp it down. He tasted it. He let the warmth spread through his chest. It was just a simple cup of coffee, but because he knew it was a fleeting moment, it tasted like the best coffee he had ever had. Keanu grabbed his keycard and left the room. The hallway was long and quiet. As he walked toward the elevator, he passed a maid pushing a heavy cart. In the past, he might have given a quick nod or kept his head down, lost in his own thoughts. He was used to being invisible, or perhaps too visible, depending on who was looking. But today, he stopped. He looked at the woman. He really looked at her. He saw the tiredness in her shoulders, the way she was trying to do her job without being noticed. He remembered the voice telling him that everyone is fighting a battle, that everyone is just walking their own path. "Good morning," Keanu said. He didn't just say it as a formality. He said it softly, making sure she knew he was speaking to her. The maid looked up, startled. She obviously recognized him. Her eyes went wide for a second, a flash of surprise crossing her face. But Keanu didn't pull away or act like a celebrity. He just smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I hope you have a really good day today," he added. "Thank you," she whispered back, a shy smile breaking across her face. "You too." It was a small interaction. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. But as he stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, Keanu realized that those 5 seconds were what life was about. He hadn't rushed. He hadn't treated her like an extra in his movie. He had treated her like a fellow human being who was also running out of time. And in that exchange, for just a moment, neither of them was waiting for the future. They were just there. He walked out of the hotel and onto the busy sidewalk. The noise of New York hit him immediately, horns honking, sirens wailing, people shouting. The old Keanu might have reached for his sunglasses, trying to create a wall between himself and the chaos. He might have put on headphones to drown it out. But today, he didn't reach for his glasses. He walked with his head up. He felt the cool breeze on his face. He saw a young couple laughing as they shared an earbud listening to music. He saw a businessman looking stressed, checking his watch, clearly trapped in the waiting habit. Keanu felt a pang of empathy for him. He wanted to stop him and say, "It's okay. The phone call can wait. Just breathe." But he knew he couldn't force the lesson on anyone. Everyone had to find it in their own time. As he walked, someone noticed him. A young guy, probably in his early 20s, stopped dead in his tracks. He pulled his phone out, his hands shaking a little. He looked nervous, like he was afraid to bother the famous actor. Keanu saw him. Usually this was the part where the autopilot kicked in. The polite nod, the keep walking, the need to get to the destination. But Keanu stopped. He turned his body fully toward the young man. He remembered the lesson about death. If this was his last day on Earth, did he want to spend it being too busy for a fan? Or did he want to make a connection? The guy asked for a selfie. His voice was trembling. "I'm a huge fan, man. Your movies got me through a really hard time." Hearing that, Keanu felt a surge of something deep in his chest. It wasn't pride. It was connection. This wasn't just a fan asking for a picture. This was a human being sharing a moment of vulnerability. "Of course," Keanu said. He didn't just stand stiffly. He put his arm around the guy's shoulder. He leaned in. He didn't rush the guy to take the photo. He waited until the guy was ready. They took the photo, and then Keanu didn't pull away immediately. "Thank you for telling me that," Keanu said, looking the guy right in the eyes. "I'm really glad you're still here. Keep going, okay?" The young man looked shocked. He wasn't used to being seen. He wasn't used to the movie star acting like a real person. He nodded, a genuine smile lighting up his face. Yeah, okay, thanks, man. Keanu watched him walk away, looking at the photo on his phone with a huge grin. It was such a small thing, but Keanu realized he had just changed that kid's day. And maybe, just maybe, that kid would go home and be kinder to someone else because of it. He continued walking down the street. He didn't have a specific destination. He wasn't going to a meeting. He wasn't going to a set. He was just walking. He felt a lightness in his step that he hadn't felt in years. The heavy backpack of grief was still there. He knew he couldn't just erase the past, but it didn't feel like a crushing weight anymore. It felt like experience. It felt like depth. He realized that the secret wasn't to be happy all the time. The secret wasn't to ignore the pain or pretend that the bad things didn't happen. The secret was to remember that every single second was a gift. The pain was there because he had loved deeply. The stress of the city was there because people were striving for things they cared about. Even the traffic was made up of people trying to get somewhere. Keanu Reeves walked through the crowded streets of New York, surrounded by millions of people, but he didn't feel alone anymore. He was part of the flow. He wasn't waiting for the next movie or the next success or the future. He was here. He was breathing. He was witnessing the miracle of being alive. Even with all its scars and its inevitable end, he looked up at the sky, a vast open blue above the skyscrapers. He didn't say anything out loud, but he sent a thought of thanks into the universe. He had asked for the worst habits, and he had been given the best truth. Death wasn't a curse to run from. It was the reason to run toward life. As he turned the corner, disappearing into the crowd, he wasn't just an icon or a celebrity. He was a man who had woken up, and he was ready to live, truly live, one moment at a time.